Welcome on into 19 on the Clock, your Tri-State high school and college sports podcast. I'm your host, Brad Pushkar. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Jackson McCarty. Jackson, how are we doing this fine Wednesday?
I'm doing great, Brad. I'm bittersweet, we'll say, because the basketball season for high school has ended. As has a lot of the college basketball season. We're starting to get to that springtime. Baseball's back, fortunately, which we will be talking a lot about, like high school basketball in the coming weeks and months, or baseball, rather.
Baseball, yep.
See, it's still top of mind. But, it's just when one door closes, another opens, and you got to be ready for that.
And that's the best part about sports, though, that there's never a time where you can't watch something.
Well, and the door always comes back open.
Yeah.
It's not a goodbye. It's a see you later.
And at a certain point, the door comes really crowded when you have, like, that one day a year where it's an NFL, a MLB, an NBA, a NHL game.
You've got to run the gauntlet. Yep.
Yeah.
Which, hey, we'll get there when we get there. But while the basketball season is over, we do still have a lot to talk about in the world of hoops. Matter of fact, we will have a special guest, Joe Danneman, coming on the podcast here in a little bit.
Yep.
But at the high school level, we want to recap Cooper's season and how all that unfolded. And we've got a lot of basketball stuff for Xavier as well.
For Xavier, yes.
I know how I said it.
I was like,
and I know
did
it's
he
Xavier.
say that way?
That was a Freudian slip. I know better than that.
Okay.
I hope that I've proven as much on the podcast at this point.
We'll talk. We're going to kind of recap the whole season in Cincinnati high school basketball with him, as well as Richard Pitino getting introduced as the Xavier head coach. Joe was there. We're going to talk to him kind of about that introduction and what he's expecting from the Musketeers. But like you said, Cooper finished their season out this last weekend in the Kentucky playoffs. I know that you said they fell on Friday, correct?
Yes. So if I remember right, it was the Sweet 16 was on Thursday. Then Friday was the Elite Eight.
Because then doubleheader on Saturday.
Correct.
Yes.
And so, they made it through their Sweet 16. And I want to talk quickly about that game because Henderson County, who they obviously played, we kind of forecasted that game a little bit.
Yes.
We have talked to great length about how important Cooper's offense has been for their entire season. It was kind of their engine to push this playoff push forward. It was actually their defense that got them through the first round. So they won 50-35. Very low scoring game if the Cooper Jaguars are involved. And when you look at like the box score, Jaden Combs led the team, 14 points per game, or 14 points that night, 6 boards. Andy Johnson, the guy that we put a lot of focus on throughout their year, he had 13, so just that step behind him.
Yeah.
And the worrying trend and why the score was so low is the team shot 2 for 12 from 3. And the field goal percentage wasn't just that great either. So you had reason to believe it's like, okay, maybe it's an off night, easing into it, whatever. But the shooters weren't quite lining up how they needed to in that first one. And I think that ultimately kind of forecasted what was going to happen the next week. Or the next day, rather. So they drew great crossing in the Elite Eight. They lost 49-36. As a team, they shot 29.2 from the field. With a number like that, it's going to be hard to do much anything, to be perfectly honest.
Yes.
And we did talk a lot about how Cooper needed to have more than just Andy, which they did, but it still wasn't the cast that needed to be as full as it didn't end up being.
Yes.
Isaac Brown led the team with 14. Andy brought 12 by himself. No other player had more than 3 points. And so, it's, again, you kind of run into a buzzsaw at a certain point that if your shots aren't going in, you're going to go out. And that's just kind of what happened with Cooper, even though it was an incredible run up to that point.
Now, I know there's a lot kind of up in the air with Cooper for next year, but what pieces that are sticking around, is Andy a junior or is he a senior this year?
I believe he's a senior, but let me pull up this roster right quick. I do know that, like, the big thing that has to fall first is we got to figure out what happens with the coach. Coach Sullivan, obviously, we touched a little bit on the chaos that's kind of surrounded him this offseason, and, him – you credit where it's due. He has not been pulled into it. I know our guys have asked about it, because you have to. And I think the most he would give is a no comment because, he wanted to focus for his guys, for his team, try to keep them winning.
For sure.
But yeah, it's gonna have to go kind of weird regardless. So let's see here. Isaac Brown, who we mentioned, is a senior. Andy Johnson is a senior as well. I'm looking for some of these other names that we've maybe touched on a little bit. Jaden Combs is a senior, also led that first game.
Sure.
So yeah, you're going to have a lot of turnover here, and a lot of different looks from their starting five next year. Because those are three very important pieces to the team.
But it is such a it's a little bit like D. Alexander with Purcell Marion, where she's leaving this year, Andy's leaving after this year.
Absolutely.
But you still have 3 classes worth of players who've gotten to watch that, whether it's been just this last year, whether it's been 2 years, whether it's been 3 years now, who are able to keep that culture going. And I think that is something that's really important to keep a program performing.
Absolutely. Well, and we've talked about it at the high school level, how much more coaching matters.
Yes.
Because talent is going to win out most of the time in college and definitely in the NBA. It becomes a lot more of a free-roaming game, whereas high school, it is so much more about unity. It's still that traditional style of basketball for the most part. And so depending on, again, what happens with that head coaching ordeal, and if they do manage to keep Coach Sullivan around, that'll shape and tell us exactly what we need to know about the Jaguars and kind of give you that temp check, so to speak, on how comfortable you can be with that turnover and them, figuring it out.
Yeah. And it looks like Andy is committed to play at Illinois Chicago, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so best of luck to him
Absolutely.
as he goes to college.
Yeah, and all these athletes, matter of fact, since this is the season wrap-up, so to speak, we have a ton of tri-state athletes that are going to get to continue their careers at the next level. So, best of luck to everybody, and hopefully we're talking about you on Brad's side of the podcast here, in a handful of months.
I was going to say, we're definitely talking about D next year, right?
Yeah,
she's heading to UC. So, that'll be fun. And that's always the thing I love the most about college sports in a way, is when you get those people from high schools who go on, and it's also what I like about it's for me, like even at a pro level, like I know that you've seen how many times I've walked in here with a different professional team's jersey. And I had to answer this week, so what team do you really root for?
Yes. You are a mystery within the newsroom. I will give you that.
And it's very specifically like for me, for a lot of the different teams, especially basketball jerseys that I have, it's like I have Purdue players because I got to watch, that's my team,
right,
first and foremost. But I want to see those guys succeed, and I want to kind of support them when they're playing at higher levels. So if you see me in a Boston Celtics jersey, it's because I like Carson Edwards, not because I like the Boston Celtics. But with college athletics, as we're kind of talking about it here, there's go ahead.
So this it popped up in my head, and I should have grabbed these notes beforehand. But last night was the McDonald's All-American games.
Yes, for Kentucky, right?
Just across,
yes,
because D was playing. And so I wanted to mention, because we talked about her already here, 4 points, 2 for 3 on shooting, 9 boards, made a somewhat decent impression there, and got to play with 24 of the best high school athletes in the country. So, I wanted, since we mentioned her getting that nod, I wanted to make sure to give her flowers on the back end there.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm glad you remembered that, because I totally forgot about those. So let's move. Let's switch things over a little bit to college here, because it kind of ties into high school a little bit, because the biggest thing with high school is that it's the recruiting ground for colleges.
Yes, of course.
And we wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the big change in college athletics, and obviously at the core of it all, like when you kind of when you pull back the curtain, the wizard is
money.
NIL. Yes. Specific.
Cash. Cold hard cash.
Money, name, image, likeness.
What was Derek Queen's quote?
I don't remember.
It's something about because he signs my checks or something.
Oh, yes. Yes. It's because he signed a check. It's exactly what it was. But it's the hot new position in college sports, the general manager.
Yes.
And we've kind of seen it pop up in football programs, especially I think it was 8 of – I think I saw a stat that was like 8 of the 12 college football playoff teams either this year had a general manager.
Yeah.
Notre Dame has one. I believe Ohio State has one.
I would imagine all the SEC teams have one.
Especially your SECs, your Big Tens.
Yeah.
And probably in like the higher end of ACC Big 12 schools.
If I had to guess of that group, SMU and Clemson and Boise are 3 of the 4 that don't.
Probably.
And that's not like actual backed up by anything. That's just a guess.
I would expect Boise.
I wouldn't expect Clemson though.
Clemson's weird. Yeah, just and it's not like because of the school, but because of the coach.
Right.
But yeah, I'll see if I can find that while we're talking about this moving forward. But the biggest thing with college sports that I think people are starting to pick up more and more is that whatever happens to college football trickles down to everything else.
Yeah, yes. And up to the NFL a lot of the times.
Sure. But especially within a university, it's like once the football team makes this move, then the basketball team does it. Yeah. And then it kind of ends up and it was kind of the thing with NIL in the first place where to me the broad idea of it was let these players perform a service to make money, not necessarily for playing the game, but because of who they are.
Right.
My paper last year sold these front page covers of it said no joke because it was when Purdue was going on to the Final Four. It was like on an April Fool's Day.
Yeah.
Was when it was being printed, and it was like it's a great cover. They sold a ton of them. But then at the start of the year, they had a few extras left over, and they brought in Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, who were 2 of the big guys from that team.
Yeah,
spent a few hours signing those papers, and were able to sell those then back. And it's stuff like that is to me what NIL was meant for in a way.
I think,
or the sponsorship deals of Celsius. Energy drinks and stuff like that where these players with big social media followings are able to actually make a little bit off of that.
Yeah, well, and I think there's I can't remember which comedian said it, but I've maybe Tom Segura, but he says that he performs for free. You're just paying him for travel, and it kind of relates here. They're playing basketball or football or whatever sport that they're in for free. It's the brand representation and the appearances and the promotion, so to speak, that is where your check's going.
Absolutely. But of course now, as we're a few years into this,
yes,
it
has not gotten any more calm.
It has not gotten any more calm. It has not gotten any more clear.
No,
either.
But Ohio's got a salary cap, I think,
and that is one thing that we're going to get clarified in the next coming few weeks.
Yes.
Is my goal.
Yes,
to understand NIL laws in Ohio.
Yes,
but. The big position is adding a general manager to handle the money side of things with these players, where some players are obviously getting paid to be on the team, not necessarily to do something else. Maybe there's some workarounds and stuff like that of, oh yeah, it's coming from the collective and all that, and that's especially as those have gotten more fleshed out and allowed to run free. That you've. One thing that's been brought up in like women's basketball is the TCU Horned Frogs have been pulling in transfers from kind of all over, where a lot of times people are like, why are they even going there? That doesn't actually make sense, but they're a great player.
Right.
And TCU's just trying to collect the Pokemon in a way of like, get all the good players, and we're going to continue this dominant run that we had with Haley Van Lith this year, even though she's going to be leaving, things like that. But a lot of football teams added general managers. We're seeing more come up in basketball, especially locally.
Right here,
UC, the Bearcats, just added their first ever general manager. His name's Corey Evans. He has been a amateur evaluation scout since 2021 for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Okay. Before that, he was a high school evaluator with Rivals.com 2017 to 2021.
Okay, yeah, it's a pretty solid background, and we're seeing a lot more of like the evals from journalism carrying over into this level, and now all the way up to a general manager of a college basketball program.
Yes, and it's a little bit of that like Moneyball
yeah.
aspect of it all, of advanced statistics. It's letting the guy who wants to sit in front of the spreadsheet and enjoys football in that way have a piece of what goes into a team.
Well, and it's like, I know that maybe this isn't the best way to put it, but old bones move slow, especially in the current landscape. You need people that are younger, that are more understanding of the changes, and less like the folks that are going to be more willing to depart with it because of the changes, like Larinaga at Miami or Saban at Bama, or, like you've got to have people that not only are they invested in where the sport is going, but they're going to have to be here for the long haul.
And that's why I think it's interesting. You were going to set me up for this, but I'm going to go in a different route now because I think that it's either have a young a young coach who's willing to adapt to this change, or have someone come in from a system that is like this, which is pro football.
Yes.
Which is why you have Bill Belichick at North Carolina with Michael Lombardi serving as his general manager, who has his GM with the Patriots, with the Browns. I mean, he's been working with Belichick for a long time now. And then we just saw Andrew Luck become the general manager of the Stanford Cardinal, and Frank Reich
following him into the
doors. And it's I don't believe that Belichick or Frank want to go and recruit students and do the whole sit down, meet up, shake hands, talk it out, meet the family and stuff like that.
And they might, but it's like they don't want to be a part of that, the first 80% of that process. Like NFL free agency.
Yes.
They're not hanging out with, such and such, on a whim, being like, oh, I hope my team talks to you.
At the end of the day, they know the guys that they want.
Exactly.
They're not going to be able to get it all at all the time. So, let somebody else handle this, and then give me the cream of the crop who actually shows interest or whatever, things like that.
Yeah. And even and I know he's not of the same career path, but like how Jim Nagy is at Oklahoma.
Yep.
I'm blanking on the coach's name, and I should not be right at all. Oklahoma's head football coach,
Brett Venables.
There we go.
Yeah.
I had Clemson stuck, and then I couldn't because they've had so many coordinators that popped in and out. But he still, even without being like that old school NFL coach for 100 years and whatever, is still very much an old school type of guy, at least on the surface.
Well, and so many of these, we'll run through a couple of names here because so many of these are either former players, former coaches, or former scouts.
Yeah.
So you have Jim Nagy, NFL scout, senior bowl director, has been. Obviously, he's been entrenched in that high school staff for a while.
He's been coordinating college kids to help them get to the pros for a decade now.
Exactly. At Notre Dame, it's Mike Martin, who was the Detroit Lions scout. At USC, it's Chad Bowden, who was the Notre Dame general manager and a player personnel staffer. At Nebraska, it's Patrick Stewart, who worked with the New England Patriots. Ron Rivera at Cal with the Golden Bears. He was he was a Super Bowl winner, type thing.
Multi-time head coach or coach of the year. Like he knows what's going on.
You have G. Roy Simon at Maryland now, who was on a lot of practice squads in the NFL, but played a lot of ball in Canada in the Canadian Football League. Sean McGee at Michigan now.
Yeah.
You have a lot of these things. And so I think basketball is slowly starting catching up, because you've had now the biggest one that was announced at the start of the basketball season, Woj, who again was a little bit different, but leaving ESPN for as many years as he did to go to St. Bonaventure and be the general manager, I thought was a huge move. There's Baker Dunleavy, who used to coach Quinnipiac, is now the general manager for Villanova. Bill Carr at UC San Diego. Chris Ogden is an assistant coach at Texas, but I believe is also handling the general manager side for that. And then this is one that I think is going to knock another domino down, which is Oklahoma University hiring an assistant general manager, Trae Young, the current NBA player, 4-time All-Star for the Atlanta Hawks.
Yes.
He didn't get traded, right?
No, he's still there. Everybody else has, but he didn't.
And obviously he was huge for Oklahoma's basketball team when he was there. And I think it's very interesting when I was reading the press release for that was that he is going to focus on player personnel and roster management planning, and then serve a quote critical role in helping build student athletes' brands and maximizing their potential. Okay. Which to me is, hey, we have an athlete who does brand deals all the time, who just recently graduated from us, however many years ago now, 5, 6, 7.
7 would be my guess. I mean, it was the same year as Luka, so if we backtrack that math.
And he's 26 years old, so I think it's 7 years now.
It'd be 7.
Yeah.
We'll go with it.
Yeah, just about. And but that's a contact to talk to Under Armour. That's a contact to talk to. Actually, I think he's an Adidas player, maybe. I don't know.
But it's to talk to your sponsors and
talk to the sponsors. Build this. Also just tell these players like how to work with an agent in the long term.
Yeah, like what are your pro tips to not getting so stressed out by people coming up to you and being like, I'm a big fan, like and losing that part of your privacy. Like, it's as much a personal resource as anything else, at least to the way I'm hearing it.
Yeah, and so it's again that thing where it's like, okay, it started at football, moved to men's basketball now. I think we're gonna probably see something. I don't think we're going to see general managers for soccer, for volleyball necessarily, but I think we're going to get new hires at a lot of schools, especially your major ones. You're like in volleyball, Texas, UK, Louisville, Nebraska. I mean, Nebraska especially.
Baseball probably. I don't.
Baseball I think is in a weird.
I think that'll probably also be kind of exclusive to your top 50 programs.
And I think baseball's especially one where just the nature of recruits in a way, because a lot of the big gets sometimes are coming straight out of high school.
Right.
They're not, they don't have the requirement of playing in college like the NFL or the NBA has.
Yeah, because Major League Baseball has such a devout development system.
Yes, exactly. And it's been established. It's there. And, at the end of the day, college football is basically the development system for the NFL.
Right.
But, as a lot of these sports, like women's volleyball, like I think even like some soccer programs have been getting a lot more attention. Just as things, especially on social media, how they grow and these players get these followings, you're going to need, I don't think the longtime head coach of a women's volleyball team is necessarily going to want to deal with working out a way to maximize your brand per se when they're just focused on the game and wanting to win.
Well, yeah, I think there's two big components to that. One is pro potential. Mm-hmm. One is
which is growing for women's volleyball.
Exactly.
But, yes.
But it's pro potential and it's commitment of funds by the university to those programs.
Yes.
If you're not a top 5 earner for the school, there's probably a pretty good chance they're not going to get you a GM.
Absolutely.
Until you prove that you have the assets and the weight behind you, I guess, to need one. So yeah, it'll be weird seeing how they pick, and we might be wrong, and it might just become uniform across the whole ordeal. But wouldn't be the first time I was wrong about NIL and the way it was going to go. But it is a very interesting case study, and it feels like we never really get any answers in the world of NIL. It feels like we just keep getting more questions.
Yeah, and I mean part of that's just the way that things are still. There are numbers that are thrown around, like I think it was something like $4.5 million for a BYU basketball player to come there or something like that.
Yeah.
You hear these numbers, but it's not on books. You can't records request it from a public university or anything like that. It's not, these aren't things that are just open and out there. And especially I think the way that like student protection laws work and things like that, you're not going to know that.
Right,
So,
especially now that, if I remember right, from the whole Ohio change ordeal, collectives, they're not necessarily, like, unnecessary, but like they're more of a safety guard than anything, because I think students are going to be allowed to kind of work more directly with universities.
Yes.
And so
that was one of the big changes with Ohio.
Right. And so when that's happening, there's no way to have it on Bucks other than inside a private institution. So you're never really going to get those numbers.
Yeah. So Xavier, you're not going to share it with us, but
right.
UC,
we will guess. We will be guessing.
But yeah, and like you said, I don't know if it's going to be general managers across the board, but I do think that you're going to see more maybe assistant coaches who are given that role as they recruit, as they go along, and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, do we want to get to the big fish?
Yeah, that is all we have for right now. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to get Joe in here, talk a little bit more about the high school season and Xavier basketball and a couple other things. We got some other things on deck.
Yeah, there might be a curveball or two in here,
and that's what he's here for.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So we'll be right back.
All right, we are back, and we teased forward to this a little bit
because we do have what I've been calling the big fish on this podcast. Joe, this is obviously not your first appearance on here, but it's a pleasure every time. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's one of my favorite times of the year when you have this cross-section of the college basketball Final Four. You have the Masters coming up. You have Major League Baseball happening, and the NFL Draft is also this month. Yeah. So people always ask me, what's the downtime of your calendar? There is none. This month, the March into April, is one of my favorite months of the year, and I'm excited because of so many questions that'll be answered by the Bengals here in the upcoming draft and the Reds getting going, and there's so many questions about them and their season. So, I'm looking forward to the next few weeks.
Yeah, you might get a little bit extra sleep in June, but otherwise you stay a busy man, don't you?
You're right. June might be the one month of the calendar year where we can kind of kick back a little bit and get some vacation time in before training camp starts for the Bengals.
Well, yeah, so I know you've mentioned, obviously, with the Bengals and all that, but Xavier is kind of the one taking all the headlines right now, introducing their new man. You got to sit down with Coach Richard Pitino, and what were your initial impressions there?
Well, my first thought was, wow, are we sure this isn't Rick? Because the way he talks, I mean, he doesn't sound exactly like him, but there are times when he talks, certain words he hits, the way he delivers those words, you have to double take a little bit and make sure it's not Rick Pitino. What I was taken away by with Richard was just how much he targeted this job. He coached for 8 years in the Big Ten and then went to New Mexico and kind of reclaimed his career. But he wanted this gig because of 4 reasons. He wanted to coach at a basketball school. He wanted to coach in what he called an amazing city. He wanted to go somewhere where he could relate because he felt like Providence College where he went to school, and that he wanted to get back in the Big East. And I think the Big East ties all of that together. And the big question for Richard Pitino or anybody who takes the Xavier job is, how are they going to navigate the NIL world and be able to compete with these huge state brands that we're seeing dominate the NCAA tournament, the Floridas, the Alabamas, the Auburns, these massive schools who have these huge donor bases. And he made a really good point about what's potentially going to happen in a week with the passing of this House bill that is going to help these schools with revenue sharing and really hurt some of these football schools, and they have to decide where they want to put their NIL money. Is it going to be in football? Is it going to be in basketball? And Xavier's a basketball-only school. So he believes they're positioned not only at Xavier but in the Big East to have the best chance to take advantage of this opportunity if this House bill passes. And I think he might be onto something. I think he might be right. So Xavier, I think it was exciting for the program to go outside of the family for the first time in what has felt like more than 20 years, where they're not just hiring the next guy on the bench or bringing back a coach who's already coached there. So not only bringing in Richard Pitino because he's outside of the family, but a guy who wants to be in the Big East and a guy who had the blessing of his Hall of Fame father to go to Xavier because he understands what the program is about, and then having the vision to see here what might happen and align the Big East in a place where they can be really successful in this era.
I was just saying there was something that I kind of picked up when you're naming off those teams. You named Florida, Auburn, Alabama, SEC schools. Big powerhouses, especially in football. And as you kind of mentioned, like the Big East is in a prime position where, UConn, St. John's this year obviously is probably going to continue to build off, and that Xavier St. John's game is going to be
both of them
crazy to watch next year. But with NIL, we just actually were talking about the rise of general managers in college sports now, or in college basketball, where we'd already seen it a little bit in football. Does that feel like something that, from when you were sitting down with him, that he wants to focus on letting someone else handle that, or is that something that you think he's kind of got an ear for, of I can handle a little bit of the money and get my guys?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's a little bit of both. He mentioned how the one thing he learned from his, and I don't want to call it a failure at Minnesota, but he lost his job. He was fired, and if you asked him, he would label it as something that he wasn't successful doing. It was delegating, was having a staff and leaning on that staff. And something he says he's learned from his time at New Mexico is how important a staff is to having success in what he's doing. So to answer your question, he understands that it's not just him doing these things, but he also understands that he's the one that has to go out. He called the donor base at Xavier, he called the fans and the people who are invested, quote, stakeholders and investors. He didn't call them fans, which is kind of the modern way you have to look at your fan base. These are the people who are going to help you get players. I mean, these are the people you have to meet. You have to shake the hands. You have to go to dinners. You have to talk to people. It's not just coaching anymore in 2025. He understands that, but he understands it can't be just him doing it. It has to be a collective amongst his group. But he's very aware, and I found that striking. When people always talk about, when they get a new job, they talk about the new fan base. When he called them stakeholders and investors, you kind of get a sense of he gets it. Yeah. He understands what he has to do. And you mentioned all those SEC schools, and here's Sean Miller, right? Sean Miller, one of the big reasons he left Xavier for Texas was he believed he had a better chance of having a bigger pot of money to get better players. And then this happens, potentially. And he's at an SEC school. And let's be honest, the football program at Texas is king by a mile. And so all of that money that he thinks he might have to spend on basketball players, and he might be right. He might have more of an opportunity there, but it's going to be interesting to see if that burns him as he starts his career at Texas.
Now, it is interesting because, obviously we mentioned, the NIL situation and how rosters are kind of fluctuating. Pitino really doesn't have that much of a roster coming home to right now. So did he kind of play his hand any on if that's going to be more high school oriented or portal, or I know it's probably going to be a mix of both, but if one is taking more precedent over the other?
Yeah, he mentioned several times that I have two scholarship players left on this team, and that's got to be a scary place for a coach to be, because you come here and you have to do all the interviews and you have to do all the introductory press conferences, and you just want to get to work. You want to get to work on getting players and getting people excited about your program, so they want to donate and become stakeholders and investors in what you're trying to do. As far as building a roster, he didn't mention specifically a breakdown of high school or college, but I found interesting what he said was the idea of trying to build a culture where you retain players. And you think about the 2025 rosters, and you look at the Final Four. Most of these guys aren't guys who have been retained outside of Houston. Houston's been the one school that's been able to recruit, keep, and then add on to, and it's led them to the Final Four and potentially a national championship for them if they keep winning. But that's what I found interesting about what Richard Pitino said, was trying to create a culture where when you get these guys in the building, they want to stay. And retaining players has become so hard in the NCAA basketball game. And so that's the challenge he's kind of laying down for himself, is whether he gets a guy from high school or whether he gets a guy from the portal, is creating the kind of culture where the guy wants to stay. And look, let's be honest too, that requires making the kind of offer where these guys want to stay. And he also made a great point too. He said, look, these guys are going to make a lot of money now. We want to set them up so they're making a lot of money for the next 10 years. And I know you're only talking about the top 2 or 3% of college basketball players who go on to play in the NBA. But when you're playing in the Big East, typically you're going to have at least one or two of those guys on your team that have a chance to go to the NBA. I would argue Dalen Swain is one of those guys that Xavier had for a couple of years. The question is, can he make the kind of offers to keep those guys, or can he create the kind of culture where those guys want to stay for whatever price tag they can come up with?
For sure. Do you have any more on the Xavier situation?
No, I think we covered it all pretty well, to be quite honest.
Well, from one wheelhouse to another, Joe, you are kind of our resident high school sports expert. You've been hanging out around here for some time, we'll say. Now that the basketball season has ended, and you want to sensationalize a little bit, and kind of hit the high points. If you had to pick a team that you're going to remember the most about from this year, kind of the one that was at the forefront of your coverage, who would you give that award to?
Well, it's interesting, and I want to pat the back of the Fox 19 sports department, because with this expanded staff, we were able to tell more stories about this basketball season than we have before. I made almost kind of a joking comment to Jeremy during one of the shows, like, I can't remember knowing so much about every individual team like we did this year because of the number of feature stories we did. I think anybody who does a story on a team tends to kind of remember that team a little bit more. Certainly one of the headliners that comes to mind is Aiken was such a great story this year. Cooper High School became a great story with the uncertain future of Tim Sullivan and the run they made to the Kentucky Sweet 16. I had the great pleasure of spending some time with Wyoming basketball team, and they'll be the team I remember most just because of my own personal experiences of being around that team and spending some time and talking to them. The Fab Four junior class that came up one shot short of playing for a state title. And what's interesting about that team is their story arc last year was they made it to the regional final and they lost there as sophomores. Okay, so can they get to the regional championship game this year and kick down that door? Well, they did it, and they beat the team who beat them the previous year. Okay, so now they get to the state semifinals as juniors, and they get knocked out on a heartbreaker. So the question's going to be, as seniors next year, can the Wyoming team come back, get back to that same spot, kick down the door, and play for a state title for the first time in program history? So that's the one team that stuck out to me. It was a little disappointing that we didn't have any state champions on the boys' side. The girls' side, the great story of D. Alexander, and you're shaking your head because I'm going to tell you, I'm on the La Rosa's High School Hall of Fame panel where we judge and pick every year the new Hall of Famers. I'm going to stand on that table someday and make an argument that D. Alexander has the greatest resume in the history of Cincinnati high school basketball.
There's absolutely a case for it. Well, McDonald's All-American last night, she just continues, even whenever it's not in the Cincinnati level, in Tri-State, she's still representing at such extremes, and you get the chance to cover in college, too.
That's great, yeah. Going to UC, the fact that she has all those state titles and all those Miss Basketball awards, like, what else can you ask for? She's dominated her sport at the high school level unlike anybody we've seen before in Cincinnati high school history. The funny thing is you walk into Purcell Marion's gym and you see a big glass case and there's Roger Staubach's jersey and his story. And in 50 years, people are going to walk in, they're going to see everything D. Alexander did, and they're going to look at Roger Staubach and wonder, Roger Staubach's a legend, NFL legend.
Yes.
And certainly she's going to have a case to be the most famous high school athlete to come from Purcell just based on what she did in high school comparatively. So, I say that half jokingly. But, yeah, I think the Wyoming team is going to stick with me just because I had the personal experiencing of being around them. And now we get to see if they can come back as seniors and do what they did from their sophomore to junior year and make that one-game jump. Can they do that again their final year in high school and take this thing all the way to the state title game?
And I think it's fair to assume that's also your team to watch for next year, obviously.
They have to be, right? I mean, there are certainly the teams you always talk about, right? The big brands in the Cincinnati area who are always good in basketball, and we know who those teams are. But Wyoming, what they're bringing back, I would be stunned if Wyoming wasn't back as regional champions and in that Final Four and a chance to go to the state championship game a second straight year.
To me, it kind of, to draw a parallel on the football side of stuff, it feels a lot like what Anderson was coming into this year football-wise, where it's like every piece is kind of in place to where it needs to be. So it's just kind of interesting that Wyoming's roster assembled and fell out the way it did, because you're right, it could be a very special year for them next year.
And it's one of those things too. It's not one of the traditional powers. It's not Moeller. It's not pick whatever team that always plays in the state championship game or makes a run to the regional championship game. This is a unique class. They had never won a regional championship before, and now they come back with the same kind of motivated hunger to try to get it done this year. And as you mentioned, Anderson, despite having such great seasons in the last 10, 15 years, isn't a traditional power. They've got state championship appearances. They have a state championship. They've been there. I don't want to short side that. But it's not one of those teams that you just show up every year and mark down as, okay, Anderson's going to be this. They have been during the Evan Dreyer era, but it kind of feels like, I don't want to use the word new money.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like, Anderson's a bit of new money. And it kind of feels like Wyoming's there as well with what they've done in recent years. With this class, the Fab Four now going to be seniors. So I kind of like your parallel on that one.
Yeah. So I know D. Alexander is going to be the answer for half of this. So we can skip that portion. But player of the year for you, kind of in that similar vein of when you look back at the 2025 basketball season, the player that you will identify with that year.
Okay, so give me some people that are coming to mind for you.
Okay, so initially, I know Trey Perry was very, very front of mind for a lot of our coverage. I wouldn't qualify Josh Tyson as in that bucket, but he's definitely going to be one next year.
No
doubt. Jaden Arnold, leading the Falcons. I'm trying to think of that All-Star 5. Andy Johnson on the Kentucky side of stuff.
Sure.
Absolutely. But that list of 5 we did, I'm just coming up short a couple names. But that would be the –
Yeah, I think it's hard to separate any of those guys from that pack of names you said. I kind of throw them all in the same tier, the same bucket. And one thing I did want to mention is we talked about Cincinnati high school basketball and none of the boys teams winning state. Mm-hmm. We have 2 5-star kids from the Cincinnati area who didn't play Cincinnati high school basketball this season. Talon Kinney left town, and then Cam Mercer, who was rated as – the top player in his high school class. I believe he was a freshman this year, maybe a sophomore. He left town. He was going to go to Winton Woods. I believe he's related to the defensive end from Winton Woods that's going to Alabama.
Yep.
So you're talking about some athletic genes.
Yeah.
So to lose those 2 guys was a big blow to the high school basketball in the Cincinnati area, and I think it's important to remember that in a couple of years when those guys are popping up on college basketball games and we're talking about these guys, you have to remember what we missed from them not being here. We did get several years of Talon before he left Newport. But I have a hard time picking anybody out of that group as someone who rose above the others. I think you nailed it with all of those guys. Andy Johnson's shot-making ability at his height felt like a difference maker, and Cooper might have been, by the time they got to the Sweet 16, the second best team in the state. The problem is they had to play the best team in the quarterfinals just because of the way the bracket worked out. And Malachi Marino, a 7-footer going to UK, and Vince Dawson, a wing they have, who's also a 3-star. I mean, it's hard to beat a team like that. And if you saw the game, you saw just how dominant Marino was against Cooper. But Andy Johnson certainly stood out to me as, I thought, the player of the year in Northern Kentucky. Aaron Gutman out of Walton Verona actually led Northern Kentucky in scoring. He's a Mr. Basketball finalist, set the school record for points scored. But, yeah, I think you nailed it with that group. You go back to the Wyoming team. It's hard to pick any of those guys out from the others. It was interesting during the regional game when they won the regional championship. Devin Evans hit so many shots that he was celebrating on the floor with his family, and I walked by going, MVP, because I thought he was the MVP of that moment.
Absolutely.
But you can pick any of those guys on any given night. It could have been their MVP. I love the Jaden Arnold pick as well because of what he represented to that team. When you think of Aiken, I think of just organized chaos, the way they played. It was fast. It was aggressive. It was in your face,
and it was 50-second second half buckets.
Exactly, and that's who he is.
Yeah.
And that's why I think mentioning him is kind of a bit of the representation of what Aiken was, and to put him in that category, I think is more than fair. I think it's great you brought him up, because I think he represented too. If it's not just one of the best stories of the high school basketball season in Cincinnati this year, he was kind of the representation as the heart and soul of that team, along with their head coach. So, yeah, I can't pick anybody. I can sit here and talk myself in circles about which player I think I would want to separate from the others. But, yeah, I think I would go with Andy Johnson in Northern Kentucky. And I think I would ultimately land on the – let me say this. Last point I'll make. When people ask me about the MVP, whether it's the NBA or it's the NFL, I always say, can you tell the story of the season without that person? Mm. I don't think you can tell the story of the high school season in Cincinnati without Jaden Arnold.
Absolutely.
So I'll land on him as my MVP.
There we go. Oh, and I do want to circle, because like you had mentioned a couple of the athletes that left the tri-state that we missed out on, Rayshon Hubbard as well at West Claremont.
That's right.
Making, 2 games?
Yep.
And then being done, and I think both of those games were over 20 points. So there's no telling what that would have been as well. So now I know I just gave you fits on having to pick and choose, but I am going to put you in that corner one last time before I leave you to it. If you had to say which one was more impressive for the tri-state this year, the football season or the basketball season?
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to help jog my memory on the football season. So we had was it Anderson who came up just a couple of plays short of winning a state title?
And in the semifinals, last-second heroics to get through. Moeller was at the state final. Were those our only 2? Because I think Winton went out a little early.
And then we had Beechwood win state in Northern Kentucky.
Yep.
I'm going to go with...
Did Cooper win football?
Cooper went to the state title game.
Did not win it, though.
Did not win it.
That's what
the state title game. Boy, what was more memorable, the high school football season or the high school basketball season? Let me say this and everything always comes from the individual perspective.
Of course.
Right? Just like I answered the Wyoming question.
Yeah.
With what team is going to be remembered most by me. I'm going to remember the high school football season as the season where we launched what I've always wanted, which was the 30-minute high school football show.
Yes.
I've been fighting for that for 15 years, and it finally happened. Mm-hmm. We had an expanded staff. We had 30 minutes, and we launched that during football season, and it was so rewarding.
Yes.
And that carried on to high school basketball season, which was awesome, which was fun, and I'm glad we did it, and we will continue to do it. But I will always remember the 2024 high school football season as the launch of something that I've wanted forever, and we got it done.
You finally caught your ghost.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know?
It's something you've been chasing for a decade plus.
And I'll peel back the curtain a little bit. When I had conversations with our GM when we got the Bengals contract, she was so excited about the Bengals contract and an expanded staff, and I was too, because, look, if you can hitch your wagon to the NFL, that's a great thing for business. But the first thing that came to my mind was, can we expand the final quarter?
Absolutely.
So she's talking Bengals and shows and staff, and I'm talking the final quarter. She said, that's all you care about? That's all you want? I said, of course it's not the only thing, but it's just coming straight to mind right now, because now we have the bodies and the resources to do it. And she greenlit it, and it happened. And I thought it was a great thing. I just had a conversation yesterday. I was at Xavier. We were waiting between live shots to talk about Richard Pitino. And one of the members of the Cintas Center staff was talking to Jeremy, myself, and Reagan about the final quarter. I can tell you this with all sincerity. Everything I do in this business, Reds, Bengals, college, name it, FC Cincinnati, when people stop and talk to me, they always talk about the final quarter.
Really?
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
And that is the most Cincinnati thing ever.
Yes.
That when people see a local TV guy, they want to talk about high school sports.
Well, and I know it's tradition out here that if they ask what school you went to, they do not mean college.
That's correct.
But they, by no means do they mean college.
Well, Richard Pitino asked me yesterday where I went to school, and I had to think about it. Because he's not from Cincinnati. I said Syracuse because I thought I could relate, because his dad actually started his career coaching at Syracuse, and then I tried to nudge him and say, hey, does your dad want to leave St. John's and go coach my alma mater and get us back to the NCAA tournament?
Are you one of the assistant GMs that just got
That's
a job?
Right.
Is that
That's right. I'll do whatever I can to get Syracuse basketball back to relevancy. To answer your question, I can't really pick one or the other.
Yeah.
I think – I'll say this, and I think anybody listening to this who's a fan of high school sports in Cincinnati, we know the standard of what we expect from our high school teams. It was a little disappointing the fact that we didn't win more, and I say we because all of these teams are in the circle of trust
Absolutely.
for a local TV guy. We didn't win as much as I thought we would win, whether it's in high school basketball or high school football. I expect our teams to win a lot, and they didn't win as much as I'm used to us winning, so it was a little disappointing in that, but the most rewarding high school season of my career because of what we accomplished here at Fox 19 and the standard we've now set. And that's a win-win for everybody because it's a win for us because it's what we love to do, but it's a win for the local high school kids because we cover more games and go to more places than anybody else in town. And if we can feature these kids and have a moment for them, I think that's a great thing. And so I can't pick one over the other, but I think I'll always look back on the 2024 high school football season as the most memorable because of what we accomplished and what we launched.
And I do want to say, because I've been here a little over a year and a half now, being a part of the final quarter in my little dose has been one of the more gratifying things I've done while I'm here.
It's so much fun.
It is a fascinating.
the best.
Not only is it pure absurdity for the folks who don't get to see what happens before the show starts.
Exactly.
It is maybe the most off the wall situation that you have ever been a part of in your life. But when the cameras turn on, everything else falls into place. Even if it's not how it was supposed to, it always comes out as an incredible product, and I'm thankful to you guys for letting me be a part of that.
There was a news director who worked here before our current news director who floated the idea of me leaving sports and going into a news role as a news anchor, which was flattering.
Right.
But I said to him, and I'll say it here, the first thought that came to mind is if you're a news anchor, you're working a Monday through Friday, and on a Friday night, finishing up the news and sending it over to Jeremy and whoever he's working with, in this case, Gabby and Reagan, and say the final quarter is next, and not to be part of that.
Yeah.
There's no way I could leave that behind. I just could not do it. I would have so much FOMO. I would probably just sit there.
Yeah, like how Reagan and Gabby are at the desk, you're just sitting in
I'd
between
just sit
them.
there
Not
waiting.
even-
I'd probably undo my tie. I'd get a little drink, and I'd just sit there and watch my favorite show happen and just be melancholy that I couldn't be part of it. So I could never give that up. It's my favorite show of everything we do. It's so much fun, and I know Cincinnati appreciates it because of how much they appreciate high school sports.
Yeah, and I know that show kind of gets to be the ultimate magnifying glass to you guys' personalities, which is going to bleed us wonderfully into what Brad's got for you.
Yes.
Yes, I wanted to add as well that without the final quarter, doing this podcast wouldn't be possible.
That's right.
As well, because
Sure.
you know, when I came to Jackson originally, I said like, "What talk about like pro sports or something," and he's like, "I know high school. I do coverage.
The institutional knowledge of
I'll
being
figure
in
it out
every single week.
Absolutely, yeah, because you're sitting out there and you're seeing 30 or 20 games,
Correct.
and like everything starts sticking with you, and there's so much engagement. They even, like, again, my little slice of the pie, going to 1 or 2 games every week, people coming up to you and being like, this is on final quarter, right? This is hit and win. This is doing that. This is going to be on social media, right? And it's like, okay, like, there's a lot more to grab here.
And it's hitting an audience that we traditionally wouldn't get. We all understand in local TV that teenagers, high school kids, typically aren't watching the local news except for Friday nights. And you can also connect with them, and you mentioned the word engagement. You can you can then connect with them on social media as well. So, yeah, that in that way, it's gratifying that you're able to connect with younger people all the time. I have kids come up to me like, "Hey, Mr. Danneman, you called my highlight 10 years ago, and my family saved it on our phone, and we still watch it every Christmas." I'm like, that's the good stuff, man. I love that.
Danneman's part of everybody's Christmases here in the tri-state.
Right.
So as Jackson said, getting a little look at your personality. I want to share a story even before this.
Okay.
Because this was told to me by our coworker Celia, who was a Final Quarter producer for a while.
She was.
And said that the only time she has ever heard you and Jeremy yell and scream at each other more was a debate over candy bars.
Accurate.
Oh, no.
And so now you made a post on X last night,
Yes.
a 1 a.m. thought, as directly from your Twitter as possible. My own worst enemy better than Mr. Brightside.
Correct.
Explain.
Defend your take.
I want to hear the thought process behind this.
So I'll go back to what I said at the very beginning. I think the first question was everything you come at with an opinion comes from a personal perspective.
Yes.
And I've had a couple of magical moments with my own worst enemy.
Okay.
Including my oldest brother's 40th birthday. My oldest brother played college baseball at Xavier.
Okay.
So he's a huge college baseball fan, always wanted to. His bucket list was to go to the College World Series. So we made it happen for his 40th. Just
Right
a bunch
on.
of guys. I think there were 15 guys, his brothers, his friends. And we were at a bar after watching baseball for
Jello
8 to
shots,
10
I hope.
hours of plenty. I've actually gone back to the bar to try to relive the moment, and you can never capture that moment. And my own worst enemy came on at just the right time, and we had such a ball with that song. But I think the peak into my personality is how much I lean on the 80s and 90s as my formative years. And my own worst enemy was high school, first car, getting that album and playing it at max volume as I was driving to work at Skyline. That's my memory.
What the most Cincinnati statement
Isn't
maybe
it
I've
great?
ever heard.
Right? And I think that's where music takes us. Music is so transformative. It takes you to a place, and my own worst enemy takes me to such happy places and great times in my life, unlike Mr. Brightside, which I think is more of a generation younger than me.
Yes.
And that's where I am. I am so protective of my generation and my generation's standing in whatever it is, technology, movies, music. Take me back to the 80s and 90s. I'm such an 80s and 90s guy when it comes to movies and music. That Mr. Brightside just doesn't hit as well with me as my own worst enemy. And it was funny because it's funny you mentioned that. The whole 1 a.m. thing, the one random thought at 1 a.m. was what I tried to be less of a local TV robot and showed some personality. I started this several years ago. I had a really close friend that was kind of like the role you are here, who was a producer, who would shoot on Friday nights, who loved sports, who wanted to pursue a career in sports. And we lost him to cancer in his mid-20s. He was my guy I would text at 1 a.m. about whatever is happening. Like last night I was watching the Nuggets and T-Wolves game, and it was crazy. And I needed someone to text. And when I lost Brad, I started using Twitter as a place to start conversation. If something came to mind at 1 in the morning, I'm not going to bed until 2 because I just got home from work. I use that as a place for conversation. And so that started the 1 a.m. thought. And then DeMar Hamlin happened.
Yep.
And my Twitter became different.
You vary.
And I started kind of I tried to more professionalize, for lack of a word that actually exists. I don't think professionalize is a word.
Well, we'll use
That's
it.
good enough.
It sounds professional.
I tried to make it professional and for a while and, hang on to all those followers and kind of take away some of the personality. But as that stabilized here over the couple of years since, I've tried to go back into some of my personality a little bit. And I was sitting there last night and, my own worst enemy came on. And I'm like, this is so much better than Mr. Brightside. and Mr. Brightside has been adopted by colleges, right? I think
Yeah.
Michigan, they all sing it, that kind of thing. And,
That's why you hate it.
And so, it's generational. And so that's why my own worst enemy, I can imagine me in my 89 Honda driving at full blast on the way to Skyline and sitting in my car for one more verse before I went into work, just screaming it because it was the best song. It got me so pumped up, and it takes me to a great place. That's why my own worst enemy forever for me will be greater than Mr. Brightside.
Well, Joe, I appreciate you for coming out of your cage and doing this podcast.
This is just fine.
Yeah,
just fine.
I would agree.
I love doing podcasts and talking about my job because it almost feels like I'm on a therapist couch.
Yeah.
And I remind myself of all the things that I love about what I do.
Yeah, it gives that little spark a little
It does.
bit.
You talk about high school sports and you talk about the process of making it happen on the final quarter. And then you talk about interviewing Richard Pitino and meeting new people and the Pitino family. And it's just kind of a cool thing, the experiences and the people that you get and you meet in this job are it's refreshing sometimes to step back and talk about it and remind yourself exactly why you love doing what you do.
Especially at the pace you guys go at.
Yeah,
it's constant.
It's constant, but that's what I wanted. I wanted a job that wasn't going to be the same every single day. And I recently did a career day, and some kids asked me, why did you decide to do what you wanted to do? And the answer I always go to is I wanted to be 70 years old, and when I told the story of my life to whoever wanted to listen to it, hopefully some grandkids, would be that I went for it and I had fun. And I had really cool experiences and I met cool people because of it. And halfway through my career, I think I've checked that box so far, but I've got so much more to do and see in the second half of my career.
I'm glad you threw that second part of that sentence in there because I could feel the Tri-State's heartbreaking at a possible retirement speech on 19 on the clock.
I will say this. I will retire the second I can.
There's
no doubt.
Of course.
This job, you have to be on.
Yes.
Yep.
Constantly.
Yeah.
And that can be exhausting. It can wear on you. People talk about burnout in this business. I will not allow myself to burn out. Even if I feel burnt out, I won't. I'll try to trick myself into toughing through it.
Yeah.
There are points of burnout in every position, in every job, especially in TV news. But I will not allow myself to do anything else because I'm going to see this through and understand again of the great experiences and the great people and the great places that I get out of this job. Is something I couldn't get anywhere else. I'm not going to give it up, ever.
No, and we appreciate you for it.
Yeah.
That much I can assure you.
Yeah, Joe, thank you so much for giving us your time today, coming on, talking.
Have me on more often.
Yeah, hey, trust me. You've caught me enough at the coffee
Yes.
machine at this point. The message has been received.
Good. I enjoy doing this, and thank you guys for what you do. And we understand in this building how important high school sports are.
Exactly.
But trust me, everybody outside of the building does as well in Cincinnati. So the more people who talk about it and give platforms and avenues for people to talk about it, hear about it, listen to it, I think is great. I learn from you guys.
We appreciate that.
Talking high school sports. I do. There's so much in Cincinnati.
Yes.
It's hard sometimes to keep your finger on the pulse of everything. So thank you for what you guys do to keep everybody informed and updated.
Yeah, we appreciate you, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We really do.
Thank you for listening. And thank you for listening as well, our wonderful viewers and listeners. If you're listening to the audio version, you can find a video version on YouTube on our Fox19.com, the Fox 19 Sports app. And if you are watching the video version and want to take it with you on the go while you're driving sometime, you'll find it wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, and more. But that's all the time we have for now, so we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Have a good one.